Hello and welcome to the Wide Eye Reviews YouTube channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at the latest Disclosure album, Energy. Disclosure are a British electronic duo made up of brothers Guy and Howard Lawrence. They fired themselves into the spotlight with their debut album Settle back in 2013. An album which contained hit single after hit single after hit single. There were so many tracks on this thing that were being played everywhere at the time. And I don't mean in an annoying Mr. Brightside kind of way. These tracks were getting the exposure that they absolutely deserved. Hits like F for You, White Noise with a Lunar George, and When a Fire Starts to Burn, these were all well-crafted house tracks with great pop appeal. Even the deeper cuts like Stimulation and Help Me Lose My Mind with London Grammar showed that Disclosure were anything apart from one-trick ponies. This album was a real breath of fresh air into the early 2010 scene in terms of UK house music. 2 years later, they followed it up with Caracal, an album that probably wasn't received quite as well, but I thought it was a more than commendable effort. They elected to try out more of an R&B sound with some of the tracks here, collaborating with the likes of The Weeknd, Miguel and Gregory Porter. But they did so without compromising any of the production qualities that got them to that point. You know, you could still tell that these were Disclosure songs even with this shift in style. It's now been 5 years since that album came out, and outside a couple of non-album singles and an EP, Disclosure have been relatively quiet, but now they are back with their third full-length album titled Energy. Also, I am just going to be reviewing the standard edition of this album. That's the 11-track version. I know there's one on Spotify which is something like 22 tracks, a few of the singles from earlier this year and last year, but I'm just going to be talking about the 11-track version, the standard one. It kicks off with the song Watch Your Step featuring Khalees, and to be honest it's a pretty underwhelming way to introduce the project. I like the drums on this song and the vocal is pretty decent, but the song really fails to go anywhere interesting. It just sounds like it could have been lifted from the era of forgotten deep house tracks from circa 2014. And the second track, Lavender, unfortunately just follows the same pattern. It has these really funky synth guitars, which is a really great start, another promising start to a song that just fails to turn into anything substantial. The album does finally kick into gear on track 3, however, and this comes in the form of hip house cut My High. US rapper Amine delivers the verse and the hook on this gritty and aggressive beat, and to be honest that would have been enough for a really good song, but when Slow Tie comes in on the second verse, the track just reaches new heights. It is just the perfect house instrumental for him to feature on, with the beat really matching the intensity of his vocal delivery. There really isn't a dull moment on this song, and it's the first example that we get here of Disclosure taking a risk and pulling it off. This momentum then continues into the next track, titled Who Knew, which has these really gorgeous warm synth textures before this sort of garage-inspired percussion is laid over the top. Mick Jenkins is on vocal duties for this track, and he really sounds fantastic, just as he did on that K Trinada album from last year. It seems he's really quite suited to this particular pocket of electronic music. We're then given yet another highlight, which is the song Douha Mali Mali. Now this song would have been all over the summer festival season had it been going ahead. This samba house style just evokes parties in the sunshine, and it's one that they always seem to do justice. Not only that, but it's the first example on this album of a track that has those disclosurisms that makes their previous work so recognisable. Unfortunately now, after this 3-track run of greatness, it just sort of drifts back into the average territory that it opened with. The track Ce N'est Pas is one of the most forgettable songs Disclosure have ever released. The bass line gets very old very quickly, and the vocal is just painfully nondescript. It's also one of the many tracks on here that use that classic trick of fading out the instrumental slowly and then bringing it back again with a lot more force. This technique seems to be a staple across UK house music at the moment, and it is a technique that can be useful when it's deployed liberally, but when it's being used on every other track on here, it kind of loses its effect. That then leads us to the title track, and this was one of the many singles released in the lead up to the album, but unfortunately it's just more of the same. Some electrifying tribal percussion sets the track off for another really promising start before it comes to one of the most disappointing drops, for lack of a better word, that I've heard all year. It sounds like such a mundane, run-of-the-mill tech house single, something I'd expect to hear from Solardo, to be honest. Annoyingly as well, the song actually does start to progress and get a little bit better as it goes on, but it's just too little too late at that point. There are also a couple of interludes scattered across the album, and I actually do quite like both of them. If anything, I just end up wishing they were longer. The first one is a nice little neo-soul instrumental. I think this one, if it was fleshed out properly, would have sounded really good under a vocal from Neo, for example. And the second interlude has some genuinely stunning production. It has these classy string sections with some vocal sampling on top. The only thing I wish from these two cuts is that they were fleshed out to become proper songs. It seems such a waste to limit them to just these 2-minute instrumentals. Overall, I think Energy ended up being a bit of a mixed bag. There are some times on here where the Lawrence brothers hit some real career highs, but there are also some pretty disappointing lows. And the rest of it just ends up being a mixture between forgettable filler tracks and then some ideas which just don't realise their full potential. More than anything though, I think Disclosure just lose sight of what makes them so unique. They've just sort of started to fade into the background of any other UK house producer rather than carve out their own lane like they always have done. This album gets a 5.5 out of 10 from me. So that is review number 2. Thank you very much for watching again. Please do subscribe if you haven't done it already, and let me know if there's anything that you'd like me to review that's come out recently. Hopefully I can take a look at it. But once again, thank you very much for watching.